The blood-stained letter fell from Eleanor Evans' trembling hands, as the truth that had been hidden for 3 years of marriage finally revealed itself in cruel, unmistakable ink. Her husband James had another wife and 2 children waiting for him in St. Louis. It was 1885, and Columbus, New Mexico Territory, was nothing more than a dusty stop along the border, a place where the desert wind carried secrets as easily as it did tumbleweeds. Eleanor had come west as a bride at 22, full of hope and promises, only to find herself alone in a small adobe house at the edge of town 3 years later, with nothing but betrayal for company. "Mrs. Evans." The voice from the doorway startled her. She hastily wiped her eyes, embarrassed to be caught crying. There stood Jackson Quinn, his tall frame silhouetted against the harsh afternoon sun. Everyone in Columbus knew Jackson, the quiet cowboy who ran cattle north of town and rarely stayed long enough for more than supplies and an occasional whiskey at the saloon. "Mr. Quinn." Eleanor straightened her back, trying to summon dignity despite her red-rimmed eyes. "What brings you here?" "Your husband asked me to bring this." He held out a wooden box, said it was important. Of course James would send a messenger rather than face her himself after what he'd done. "Did he tell you he wasn't coming back?" The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. Jackson shifted uncomfortably. "No, madam, just asked me to deliver this. Said he'd be delayed in Santa Fe on business." Eleanor laughed, a hollow sound that held no mirth. "Business? Is that what he calls it?" She snatched the letter from the floor and thrust it toward the cowboy. "Read it, go on." Jackson hesitated before taking the paper, his eyes scanning the words written in a feminine hand. His expression darkened as he read about James Evans' other life, his real wife of 8 years, their 2 children, the home they shared in St. Louis, and how a mutual acquaintance had finally revealed Eleanor's existence to the writer, Martha Evans. "I'm sorry," Jackson said, handing the letter back. His voice was quiet but carried a weight that suggested he meant it. "I didn't know." "Neither did I." Eleanor took the wooden box from his hands. Inside was a small pouch of coins, not nearly enough to make up for a life built on lies. 3 years I've been married to a man who already had a family. 3 years of business trips and investments back east. What a fool I've been." Jackson removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair. "You're no fool, Mrs. Evans. The fault lies with the man who deceived you." Eleanor closed the box with a snap. "Thank you for the delivery, Mr. Quinn. I won't keep you any longer." But Jackson didn't move. Instead, he glanced around the modest home Eleanor had made, noting the careful touches that spoke of care and hope: embroidered curtains, a vase of desert flowers, a half-finished quilt on the rocking chair. "You have family to go to?" he asked finally. "No." The word hung between them. "My parents died before I came west. James was." She couldn't finish. Jackson nodded, understanding. "I've got a herd to move tomorrow, but I'll be back in town in 3 days. If you need anything, supplies, help with anything, I'd be glad to assist." Eleanor felt a flicker of pride. "I don't need charity, Mr. Quinn." "It's not charity, Mrs. Evans, it's what neighbors do." With that, he replaced his hat and turned to leave. At the doorway, he paused. 3 days, I'll stop by." After he left, Eleanor sank into her rocking chair, the letter clutched in her hand. Outside, the New Mexico sun beat down relentlessly, just as it had yesterday and would tomorrow, indifferent to how her world had shattered. She looked at the coins. James had sent his final payment, she supposed, for services rendered as a fake wife. The thought made her stomach turn. She flung the pouch across the room, coins scattering across the packed earth floor. 3 days. She had 3 days to decide what came next in a life that suddenly had no future. The first day after receiving the letter, Eleanor barely left her bed. The second day, Fury drove her to gather every reminder of James, his clothes, letters, the portrait he'd commissioned of them both, and burn them in the yard. By the third day, a strange calm had settled over her as she took inventory of her situation. The house, at least, was hers. James had put it in her name to protect her interests while he traveled. Now she understood why it kept his legal wife in St. Louis from claiming it. She had enough food stored to last a month, and the skills her mother had taught her: sewing, cooking, preserving. Perhaps she could take in laundry or sew for the women in town. When Jackson Quinn's knock came on the afternoon of the third day, Eleanor had just finished sweeping the floor free of the last reminders of her husband. Mrs. Evans. Jackson stood with his hat in his hands, looking somehow larger in her small doorway than she remembered. "May I come in?" She gestured him inside, noting that he'd cleaned up since their last meeting. His jawline was freshly shaved, though a small nick by his ear told her he'd rushed the job. "I brought some things," he said, motioning to his horse where several packages were tied. "Nothing fancy: flour, coffee, bacon. Thought you might need supplies." "You didn't have to do that." But she was grateful. Her pride was one thing, starvation was another. Also brought news. Jackson's blue eyes met hers directly. "Your husband, James Evans, he's been telling folks in Santa Fe that you two parted ways. Claims you'll be heading back east soon." The audacity stunned her. "Is that right? Making a clean slate for himself, I suppose." "Seems so." Jackson looked troubled. "There's more. Word is he's been selling parcels of land he doesn't own to investors, using your name on some of the documents." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "That's why he put this house in my name. Not to protect me, but to establish me as a property owner so he could forge my signature." She sank into a chair. "Will there be charges? Will people come looking for their money?" Jackson set his hat on the table. "I've spoken with Sheriff Miller. He's writing to the authorities in Santa Fe. But—" He hesitated. "It might be wise for you to establish clearly that you're not involved, that you're as much a victim as those investors." "How do I do that? No one will believe a woman over a man like James. He's charming, persuasive." She laughed bitterly. "He convinced me to marry him, after all." "I'll vouch for you," Jackson said simply. "I've been in these parts for 10 years. People know me. No, I don't speak unless I'm certain." Eleanor studied him, trying to understand why this near stranger would stake his reputation on her behalf. "Why would you do that?" Jackson's gaze didn't waver. "Because it's right. And because I've seen men like your husband before. They leave destruction in their wake without a backward glance. Someone needs to stand against that." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn." "Jackson," he corrected gently. "If I'm to help you clear your name, we should at least be on familiar terms." "Eleanor," she offered in return, the first time she'd introduced herself without the weight of a false marriage attached to her name. They unloaded the supplies together, and Eleanor insisted on cooking a simple meal as thanks. Over plates of beans and bacon, Jackson told her about his ranch north of town, modest by Texas standards, but enough to sustain a good herd of cattle. He'd been driving some to market in Santa Fe when James had approached him about delivering the package. "I never much cared for him," Jackson admitted. "Something about his eyes. Never looked straight at a person when talking about anything important." Eleanor nodded, remembering that same quality. "He always looked just past me when he lied. I thought he was being thoughtful, planning our future." She shook her head. "I was naive." "Not naive," Jackson corrected. "Trusting. There's a difference." After dinner, Jackson helped repair a loose shutter before taking his leave. At the door, he hesitated. "I'll be back in town next week. Sheriff Miller might have news by then." "I'll be here," Eleanor said, realizing it was the first time in days she'd felt certain of anything. True to his word, Jackson returned the following week with news from Santa Fe. Authorities there were indeed looking for James Evans on charges of land fraud. His description had been circulated, and there was a possibility he'd fled to California or back east. "There's a marshal who wants to speak with you," Jackson told her as they sat on her small porch. "To verify you weren't involved, I told him you'd cooperate fully." Eleanor nodded, steeling herself. "Of course, I have nothing to hide. There's something else." Jackson looked uncomfortable. "Town's talking. About you living alone out here, about your situation." Eleanor stiffened. "I see." "Nothing scandalous," he hastened to add. "Folks are concerned is all. A woman alone with your husband's reputation now in question." He trailed off. "They think I might be like him," Eleanor concluded, "that I might vanish in the night with their valuables. Some might. Others are more worried about your safety." Jackson leaned forward. "Eleanor, I've been thinking. My sister Emily runs a boarding house in Silver City. It's respectable work and she needs help, if you wanted a fresh start away from James's shadow." The offer hung between them. Eleanor gazed out at the desert landscape, the mountains purple in the distance. This place had been her home for 3 years, the only thing in her life that wasn't built on lies. "I don't know if I'm ready to leave," she admitted. "Despite everything, this is my home." Jackson nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The offer stands, whenever you're ready." The marshal arrived 3 days later, a stern man named Hollister with gray at his temples and a no-nonsense manner. He questioned Eleanor for hours about James's business dealings, his comings and goings, any papers she might have signed. Jackson stayed throughout, a steady presence at the edge of the room. "Well, Mrs. Evans," Marshal Hollister said finally, closing his notebook, "I believe you've been an unwitting pawn in your husband's schemes. I'll note that in my report." Eleanor exhaled slowly. "What happens now?" "We continue searching for Evans. As for you—" He glanced at Jackson, then back to Eleanor. "Your situation is unusual. Legally, you're not Evans's wife, given his prior marriage. But you entered the union in good faith, which gives you certain rights to property acquired during your time together." "The house is in my name," Eleanor said. "That's all I want from him." After the marshal left, promising to send word if James was apprehended, Eleanor found herself trembling with relief. Jackson brought her a cup of water, his hand steady as he passed it to her. "You did well," he said. "Hollister believes you, that's no small thing." Eleanor took a sip, gathering her thoughts. "All this time I've been Mrs. James Evans, the respectable wife. Now I learn I was never his wife at all. I'm neither married nor unmarried. I don't even know who I am anymore." Jackson settled into the chair across from her. "You're Eleanor Evans. A woman strong enough to build a life from nothing in Columbus. That hasn't changed." She looked at him, really looked, for perhaps the first time. Jackson Quinn was not handsome in the conventional way James had been. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting at distant horizons. But there was something in his steady gaze that made her feel anchored when everything else was adrift. "Why are you helping me, Jackson? Truly?" He was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. 5 years ago, my brother married a woman in El Paso, beautiful, charming, said all the right things. His jaw tightened. Turned out she was already married to a man in Albuquerque and one in Denver. She'd take what she could, money, jewelry, and vanish in the night. Eleanor's eyes widened. "What happened to her? Last I heard, she was in prison in Colorado." Jackson shook his head. "My brother never recovered, drank himself to death within 2 years. So when I see someone else suffering from the same kind of betrayal," he shrugged, "I can't just ride past." Eleanor reached across the table, hesitating before placing her hand on his. "I'm sorry about your brother. I couldn't help him, but maybe I can help you." He turned his hand, briefly squeezing hers before letting go. Get back on your feet. Find your way forward. Over the next few weeks, Jackson made a point of stopping by Eleanor's house whenever he was in town. Sometimes he brought small gifts, a book from the traveling salesman, fresh vegetables from a farmer he knew, a length of blue ribbon that matched her eyes. Other times he simply offered his company and his hands for repairs around the house. The townspeople noticed, of course. Columbus was too small for anything to go unremarked upon. Eleanor heard the whispers when she went to the general store, some disapproving, others sympathetic. She held her head high, ignoring the gossip as best she could. One warm evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson, Eleanor finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "What do people say about you spending time here?" Jackson took a sip from his coffee cup. "Does it matter?" "It might. To your reputation, your business." He set the cup down with a soft chuckle. "Eleanor, I've been running cattle in this territory for a decade. My reputation is for fair dealing and keeping my word. If some busybody wants to cluck about me helping a friend, let them. Friend." The word was both warming and somehow disappointing. Eleanor nodded, looking out at the darkening sky. "Still," she said after a moment, "perhaps we should be more careful. I wouldn't want to cause you trouble." Jackson turned to face her fully. "Eleanor, look at me." When she did, his expression was more serious than she'd ever seen it. "I'm here because I want to be, not out of pity or obligation. If you want me to stop coming, just say so and I'll respect that. But don't push me away because of what others might think." The intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "I don't want you to stop coming." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition that what had begun as neighborly assistance had grown into something neither was ready to name. Jackson cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Good. Because I still need to fix that loose board in your floor, and I promise to teach you how to shoot that revolver properly." Eleanor smiled, grateful for his ability to ease the moment. "Yes, you did, though I'm still not convinced I need to learn." "A woman alone should know how to protect herself," Jackson insisted. "Especially out here." The shooting lessons began the next day. Jackson brought a Colt .45, showing Eleanor how to load it, hold it, and aim. Her first shots went wild, the recoil stronger than she'd expected. But by the end of the afternoon, she was hitting the bottles he'd set up with reasonable accuracy. "You're a natural," Jackson praised as they walked back to the house, the sun beginning its descent. "With practice, you'll be outshooting half the men in town." "I'm not sure that's saying much," Eleanor laughed. "I've seen Mr. Peterson at the general store trying to hit a rattlesnake. He emptied his revolver and still missed." Jackson grinned, a rare full smile that transformed his face. "True enough. Though you might want to keep that opinion to yourself next time you need credit at his store." Their easy conversation continued through dinner, a rabbit stew Eleanor had prepared, and into the evening. It was only when Jackson realized how low the lamp oil had burned that he reluctantly rose to leave. "I should get back. Early start tomorrow moving cattle to the north pasture." Eleanor walked him to the door. "Thank you for the lessons today," he nodded, settling his hat on his head. "My pleasure. I'll be back in a few days if that's all right." "I'd like that," she said softly. Jackson hesitated, then in a quick movement that seemed almost unplanned, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. "Good night, Eleanor." Before she could respond, he was gone, striding toward his horse tethered at the fence post. Eleanor touched her fingers to the spot where his lips had been, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the summer night. The next morning brought news that changed everything. A rider from Santa Fe delivered a message from Marshal Hollister. James Evans had been apprehended trying to board a ship in San Francisco. He was being transported back to the territory to face charges. "The marshal says you may be called to testify," the rider told Eleanor as she stood in her doorway, the paper clutched in her hand. "When?" she managed to ask. "Trial's set for next month in Santa Fe. Marshal will send word when they need you specifically." The rider tipped his hat. "Madam." After he left, Eleanor sank onto her porch steps, the reality of facing James again washing over her. All the progress she'd made, the strength she'd found, it felt suddenly fragile against the prospect of seeing the man who deceived her so completely. She was still sitting there an hour later when Jackson rode up, his expression shifting from greeting to concern when he saw her face. "What's happened?" he asked, dismounting quickly. Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. His eyes scanned it, his jaw tightening. "I'll go with you," he said immediately. "To Santa Fe for the trial." Eleanor looked up at him. "You can't leave your ranch for that long. I can hire a man to watch things for a few weeks." His tone left no room for argument. "You shouldn't have to face this alone, Eleanor." The certainty in his voice brought tears to her eyes. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much what happens to me?" Jackson knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Because in all my years riding this territory, I've never met anyone with your kind of courage. Because you deserve better than what life has handed you so far." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because I think about you when we're apart, and I find reasons to come to town just to see your face." Eleanor's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "Jackson." "You don't have to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I know it's too soon with everything you've been through. I just wanted you to know that my help comes with no expectations. Just the hope that someday, when you're ready, you might consider letting me court you properly." Eleanor felt a smile breaking through her tears. "I think I'd like that, someday, when this is all behind me." Jackson squeezed her hands gently. "Then we'll face it together and put it behind you for good." The journey to Santa Fe took 3 days by stagecoach. Eleanor had never traveled so far north in the territory, and despite her apprehension about the trial, she couldn't help being captivated by the changing landscape, the mountains growing taller, the vegetation shifting from desert scrub to scattered pines. Jackson was a steady presence beside her, pointing out landmarks, sharing stories of his own journeys through the territory. By the time they reached Santa Fe, Eleanor's anxiety had been tempered by the simple pleasure of his company. They secured rooms at a modest hotel near the courthouse, separate rooms, with Jackson insisting on propriety despite the additional expense. "Your reputation matters," he told her quietly. "Especially now." Marshal Hollister met them the morning after their arrival, his manner as brusque as Eleanor remembered. "Evans has been charged with multiple counts of fraud," he informed them in his office. "Land swindles, bigamy, falsifying documents. He's looking at years in territorial prison." "Has he said anything about me?" Eleanor asked, dreading the answer. Hollister's expression softened slightly. "He claims you were a willing participant, that you knew about his wife in St. Louis and helped him establish credibility in the territory." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "That's a lie. We know," the marshal assured her. "His story has more holes than a target at a shooting gallery, but you should be prepared for his lawyer to paint that picture in court." Jackson's hand found hers, a reassuring pressure. "Eleanor has documentation showing she believed she was legally married. Letters where Evans refers to their future together, the house he put in her name as his beloved wife. We brought everything." Hollister nodded approvingly. "Good. The prosecutor will want to see those." He turned back to Eleanor. "You'll likely testify the day after tomorrow. The prosecutor will meet with you beforehand to prepare." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She paced her small hotel room, imagining facing James across a courtroom, hearing him twist their marriage into something sordid and criminal. Would people believe him? Would they look at her and see a naive victim or a calculating accomplice? A soft knock at her door startled her. Eleanor. Jackson's voice was low. "Are you all right?" I heard movement. She opened the door to find him still fully dressed despite the late hour. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Neither could I." He glanced down the empty hallway. "Would you like to talk? The hotel has a small sitting room downstairs." It would be proper with it being a public space. The sitting room was deserted at that hour, lit only by a low, burning lamp. They sat on a worn sofa, close but not touching, the nighttime silence of the hotel wrapping around them. What if they believe him? Eleanor finally voiced her fear. What if they think I helped him cheat those people? Jackson shook his head firmly. They won't. James Evans is a known liar with evidence stacked against him. You have documentation, witnesses to your character, and the truth on your side. The truth hasn't always been enough in my experience, Eleanor said softly. Especially for a woman. Jackson considered this, unable to deny the reality she spoke. Then we'll make it enough. I'll testify about finding you with that letter, about your shock and grief. The marshal believes you. The prosecutor believes you. His certainty was like a balm to her frayed nerves. Thank you for being here, Jackson. I don't know if I could face this alone. You could, he said with unexpected firmness. You're stronger than you know, Eleanor, but you don't have to. In the dim light, with worry etched across her features, she looked both vulnerable and resolute. Jackson fought the urge to draw her into his arms, to promise that nothing and no one would hurt her again. Instead, he simply sat with her until her eyelids grew heavy, until she was ready to return to her room and try again for sleep. At her door, she surprised him by rising on tiptoe to press a kiss to his cheek, mirroring his gesture from days before. Good night, Jackson, and thank you. The courtroom was packed when Eleanor took the stand 2 days later. News of James Evans's schemes had spread throughout the territory, bringing curious onlookers and angry victims alike to witness justice being served. James sat at the defense table, still handsome despite his time in custody. When Eleanor entered, his eyes fixed on her with a calculation that made her skin crawl. She avoided his gaze, focusing instead on the familiar figure of Jackson in the second row, his steady presence anchoring her. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed man named Donovan, led her gently through her testimony how she'd met James in her hometown of Springfield, Missouri, their courtship and marriage, their move to the territory, and finally her discovery of his betrayal. At any point, Mrs. Evans, did you suspect your husband was already married? Donovan asked. No, sir, never. Eleanor's voice was clear and steady. I believed completely that I was his wife in the eyes of God and the law. And did you ever knowingly sign documents related to land sales in the territory? No, sir. The only document I recall signing was for our home in Columbus, which Mr. Evans put in my name as protection, he said, while he traveled. When James's lawyer cross-examined her, his questions grew increasingly hostile, insinuating that she must have suspected something, that no woman could be so blind to her husband's extended absences, that perhaps she had benefited from his schemes. Objection, Donovan called repeatedly, badgering the witness. Through it all, Eleanor maintained her composure, though her hands trembled in her lap. Each time she felt her resolve wavering, she found Jackson's eyes in the crowd, drawing strength from his unwavering support. When James took the stand in his own defense, he spun a tale so convincing that had Eleanor not lived through the truth, she might almost have believed him. He claimed she had known about his first wife, that she had agreed to a business arrangement to help him establish land deals in the territory, that she had been paid handsomely for her role. "Look at her," James said smoothly, gesturing toward Eleanor. "A beautiful woman who now owns property in her own name in Columbus. Do you really believe she was an innocent victim, or a clever partner who now seeks to save herself by betraying our arrangement?" Eleanor felt the stares of the courtroom shift to her, felt the weight of doubt creeping into the atmosphere. Beside her, Jackson tensed, his hand gripping the bench so tightly his knuckles whitened, but Donovan was ready. He produced letters James had written to Eleanor, full of endearments and promises of their future together. He called the minister who had performed their ceremony, who testified to James's apparent devotion. And finally, he called Jackson to the stand. Jackson spoke clearly about finding Eleanor devastated by the letter from Martha Evans, about her shock and grief, about the small payment James had sent that couldn't begin to compensate for the life he'd stolen from her. "Mr. Quinn," the defense attorney asked during cross-examination, "what is the nature of your relationship with Mrs. Evans now?" Jackson didn't hesitate. "I consider her a friend, someone who deserved better than the lies she was told, someone I respect greatly." "Is that all?" the attorney pressed, his implication clear in his tone. Jackson met the man's gaze steadily. "My feelings for Mrs. Evans are not relevant to these proceedings. What is relevant is that I witnessed firsthand her discovery of Mr. Evans's deception, and her character is beyond reproach." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts. James Evans was sentenced to 8 years in territorial prison, with restitution to be paid to his victims, including Eleanor. As the courtroom emptied, James was led past Eleanor in chains. He paused, his eyes meeting hers for the first time since the trial began. "You'll regret this," he said softly. "When I get out, you'll see what happens to women who betray me." Before Eleanor could respond, Jackson was beside her, his tall frame blocking James from her view. "Keep walking, Evans. You won't be threatening anyone for a long time." The guards pulled James away, his face twisting with rage as he was led from the courtroom. Outside, in the bright Santa Fe sunshine, Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "It's over," she breathed. "He can't hurt anyone else now." Jackson nodded, though his expression remained troubled. 8 years is a long time, but not forever, when he's released. "That's 8 years from now," Eleanor said firmly. "I won't live my life in fear of what might happen when he gets out." Jackson smiled then, admiration in his eyes. "No, I don't imagine you will." They left Santa Fe the next day, the stagecoach journey back to Columbus somehow shorter than the journey north had been. Or perhaps it just felt that way because the dark cloud that had hung over Eleanor since receiving Martha's letter had finally lifted. As the stage rolled into Columbus 3 days later, Eleanor looked at the town with new eyes. No longer was it the place where she'd been deceived. It was the place where she'd found her strength and perhaps the beginning of something true. "What will you do now?" Jackson asked as he helped her down from the stage. Eleanor squared her shoulders. "Start over. Properly this time. The court awarded me the house and restitution. I thought I might open a small bakery. My mother taught me, and Columbus could use one." "A fine idea," Jackson agreed. The ranch hands would ride for miles for good bread and pies. They walked toward her house in comfortable silence, the evening settling around them with the familiar sounds and scents of the desert. At her door, Eleanor turned to face him. "Thank you, Jackson, for everything." He removed his hat, holding it in his hands. "I meant what I said in court, Eleanor. My feelings for you are not relevant to the proceedings," she finished with a small smile, "but they might be relevant now." Jackson's eyes lit with hope. "I'd like to court you properly, Eleanor. No rush, no pressure. Just the chance to show you that not all men are like James Evans, that some of us mean what we say and keep our promises. Eleanor felt her heart quicken. I'd like that. But I need time, Jackson. Time to find out who Eleanor Evans truly is when she's standing on her own. He nodded, understanding in his gaze. I've got nothing but time, Eleanor, and there's nowhere else I'd rather be than right here in Columbus, watching you discover yourself. The next months passed in a gentle rhythm. Eleanor opened her bakery in a small addition built onto her house, and it quickly became a gathering place for the town. Her bread and pies earned a reputation that spread beyond Columbus, bringing travelers and ranchers from miles around. True to his word, Jackson courted her with patience and respect. He brought her wildflowers when they bloomed in the hills, helped expand the bakery when demand grew, and spent evenings on her porch talking about everything and nothing. He never pressed for more than she was ready to give, content to let their relationship unfold at its own pace. By the time winter arrived, bringing rare snow to the border town, Eleanor had come to look forward to his visits as the brightest part of her days. She found herself watching the road when she knew he was due in town, her heart lifting at the sight of his familiar figure on horseback. One crisp December evening, Jackson arrived with a small pine tree tied to his saddle. "Thought you might like some Christmas cheer," he explained as he set it up in the corner of her parlor. Eleanor was touched by the gesture. "It's perfect. I haven't had a Christmas tree since I left home." They decorated it with bits of ribbon, dried berries, and small ornaments Jackson had brought from his ranch. When they finished, they sat before the fire with cups of coffee, admiring their handiwork. "I've been thinking," Jackson said after a comfortable silence, "about the future." Eleanor turned to look at him, noting the serious set of his features. "Oh, my ranch is doing well. The new breeding stock I brought in has strengthened the herd. The house." He hesitated. "It's not much. Nothing like what you've made of this place, but it's solid. Room to grow." Eleanor set her cup down carefully. "Are you asking me something, Jackson?" He met her gaze directly. "Not yet. Just telling you that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, there's a place for you. A life if you want it." His voice softened. "I love you, Eleanor. I think I have since that first day when you showed such courage in the face of betrayal. But I promised myself I'd give you time, and I mean to keep that promise." Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes, not of sadness but of a joy so unexpected it caught her by surprise. "Jackson Quinn," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I do believe you're the finest man I've ever known." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I'm not ready to leave Columbus yet. The bakery is thriving and I've only just found my footing. But knowing that you're waiting, that there's a future possible when I am ready." She squeezed his hand. "That means everything." Jackson brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Then I'll keep waiting, however long it takes." Spring came early to the border the following year, bringing wildflowers and new beginnings. Eleanor's bakery had become such a success that she'd hired a young woman from town to help with the increasing orders. Her restitution money from James's trial had allowed her to expand again, adding a proper dining area where customers could enjoy her baking on the spot. Jackson's courtship continued with the same steady patience that characterized everything he did. He never pushed, never pressured, content to let Eleanor set the pace of their relationship. They rode out to his ranch occasionally, Eleanor growing familiar with the rolling grassland, the sturdy house, the cattle that were the foundation of his livelihood. It was on one such visit, as they sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the western sky, that Eleanor finally gave voice to the decision that had been forming in her heart. "I've been thinking," she said, echoing his words from months before, "about the future." Jackson turned to her, his expression attentive. "Have you now?" The bakery is doing well. Maria can handle most of it on her own now with just occasional guidance from me. She took a deep breath. I've been thinking it might be time for a change. What kind of change? Jackson asked carefully, though hope had kindled in his eyes. Eleanor smiled, her heart full and certain in a way it had never been with James. The kind where I might see if there's still room for me in that future you talked about, here on this ranch, with you. Jackson was still for a moment, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then slowly, deliberately, he took her hand in his. Eleanor Evans, I have loved you since the day I found you with that letter in your hands, showing more courage than most men I've known. I've waited, hoping you might one day feel even a fraction of what I feel for you. His voice grew husky with emotion. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying yes, Jackson. Yes to a future together. Yes to building a life here. She squeezed his hand. Yes to loving you for the rest of my days if you'll have me. Jackson's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. If I'll have you. Eleanor, you are all I've wanted since the moment I met you. He rose, pulling her gently to her feet before kneeling before her. From his pocket, he withdrew a simple gold ring with a small pearl set in the center. I've been carrying this for months, he admitted, waiting for the right moment, waiting until you were ready. He looked up at her, his blue eyes shining with love. Eleanor Evans, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? My true and only wife for all our days. Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks as she nodded. Yes, Jackson. Yes, with all my heart. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to take her in his arms. Their kiss was tender at first, then deepened with the promise of all they would share together. When they finally parted, Jackson pressed his forehead to hers. I promise you, Eleanor, I'll only ever have you. No lies, no secrets. Just this love between us, honest and true. I believe you, she whispered. And for the first time since discovering James's betrayal, Eleanor trusted those words completely. They were married in May, with wildflowers decorating the small church in Columbus. The whole town turned out to see the baker who had overcome scandal and hardship, wed the respected rancher who had stood by her through it all. Maria managed the bakery in Eleanor's absence as they took a short wedding trip to Santa Fe, reclaiming the city as a place of joy rather than painful memories. Upon their return, Eleanor moved to the ranch, though she still traveled to town 3 times a week to oversee the bakery. Jackson had built an addition to the ranch house while she was making her preparations, a bright kitchen with large windows overlooking the eastern hills. So you can bake here too if you miss it, he explained as he showed her the space. And so our children will always wake to the smell of their mother's bread, the way I woke to my own mother's. The mention of children, their children, made Eleanor's heart swell. After believing her chance at motherhood had been stolen along with her false marriage, the prospect of building a family with Jackson was a gift beyond measure. Their first child, a son they named Thomas, was born the following spring. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, crawling earlier than any baby Maria had ever seen and walking before his first birthday. With Thomas secure in a sling on her back, Eleanor continued to split her time between the ranch and the bakery, her days full but deeply satisfying. Jackson would often ride into town with them, proudly showing off his son to anyone who would look, which was everyone in Columbus. You've made me happier than I ever thought possible, Jackson told her one night as they sat on their porch, Thomas sleeping peacefully inside. Sometimes I still can't believe you chose me. Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, secure in the knowledge that their love was built on honesty and respect. We chose each other, and it's the best choice I've ever made. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm of seasons and growth. Their second child, a daughter named Sarah, arrived 2 years after Thomas, completing their family. The children thrived in the open spaces of the ranch, learning to ride almost as soon as they could walk, helping with age-appropriate chores and delighting in their mother's baking skills. The bakery in town continued to flourish under Maria's day-to-day management, with Eleanor providing guidance and new recipes. It had become such an institution in Columbus that when travelers asked for directions, locals would often guide them using the bakery as a landmark. 2 buildings past Evans' Bakery, or just across from where you get those cinnamon rolls. 7 years passed in this way, years of hard work and deep contentment. Eleanor rarely thought of James Evans anymore. The pain of his betrayal faded to a distant memory that had no power over her present happiness. Then one autumn morning, a letter arrived from Santa Fe that brought the past rushing back. James Evans had been released from territorial prison, having served his full sentence. The authorities, remembering his threat in the courtroom years before, had sent word to warn her. "He won't come here," Jackson assured her that night after the children were asleep. "He'd be a fool to show his face in Columbus or anywhere near our ranch." Eleanor nodded, though worry had settled between her shoulders. "You're probably right. He's likely headed east back to St. Louis." But both knew that men like James Evans didn't always make rational choices, especially when pride and revenge were involved. Jackson began taking extra precautions, keeping his rifle closer at hand, instructing the ranch hands to report any strangers in the area, riding into town with Eleanor and the children rather than letting them go alone. A month passed with no sign of James, then another. Eleanor began to relax, believing Jackson had been right. James Evans had moved on, seeking easier prey elsewhere. Then one afternoon, as she was closing the bakery, preparing to meet Jackson and the children for the ride home, she looked up to find James standing in the doorway. He had aged in prison, his once handsome face now weathered and harder, but his smile was the same, charming and utterly false. "Hello, Eleanor," he said casually, as if he'd just returned from a business trip. "You're looking well. Married life agrees with you, I see." Eleanor's hand moved slowly toward the drawer where she kept the revolver Jackson had insisted she keep at the bakery. "What do you want, James? Just to talk. Old times, new beginnings." He stepped further into the shop, glancing around at what she'd built. "Quite the enterprise you've created here. And I hear you've married that cowboy who testified against me. Quinn, wasn't it? Children too, from what the locals say." The casual mention of her family sent ice through Eleanor's veins. "Say what you came to say and then leave, James." "There's nothing for you here." His expression hardened. "On the contrary, you owe me, Eleanor. 8 years of my life taken because you couldn't keep faith with our arrangement." "There was no arrangement," she said evenly, her hand now on the drawer handle. "Only your lies." James moved closer, his eyes cold despite his smile. "I've had 8 years to think about how to make things right, Eleanor. 8 years to plan exactly how you would pay for your betrayal." Eleanor pulled the drawer open, her fingers closing around the revolver. "Step back, James. I don't want to hurt you, but I will protect myself and my family." He laughed, the sound chilling in the empty bakery. "You won't shoot me, Eleanor. You haven't got it in you." "She might not," came Jackson's voice from the doorway, his own revolver already drawn. "But I surely do." "Step away from my wife, Evans." James turned slowly, his calculating gaze taking in Jackson's steady aim. "Quinn, still playing the hero, I see." "Not playing anything," Jackson said calmly. "Just protecting what's mine. Now you have 2 choices. You can walk out of here, get on your horse and ride out of Columbus, never to return. Or you can test whether prison has made you faster than a bullet." For a tense moment, Eleanor thought James might actually choose the latter. Then something in his expression shifted, a cold assessment of the odds, perhaps, or simple self-preservation. "Always did think you were better than me," James said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "The honorable Cowboy, the faithful husband. Does she know about the woman in Silver City? The one you were so fond of before Eleanor here caught your eye?" Jackson didn't take the bait. "My past is no secret from my wife. Unlike you, I don't build my life on lies." He gestured with the revolver. "Now make your choice, Evans. The door or the Undertaker." James's gaze slid to Eleanor, hatred plain in his eyes. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," she said with quiet certainty. "It was over the day I learned the truth about you. Nothing you say or do can touch me now." Something in her calm confidence seemed to deflate him. For the first time, Eleanor saw the truth. James Evans was a small man whose power came only from the fear and uncertainty of others. And she was no longer afraid. With a final venomous glance at them both, James backed toward the door. "Enjoy your perfect life, Eleanor, while it lasts." "I intend to," she replied steadily. Jackson kept his revolver trained on James until he mounted his horse and rode out of town. Only then did he lower the weapon and turn to Eleanor. "Are you all right?" he asked, crossing to her in 2 long strides. Eleanor nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she placed the revolver back in the drawer. "I'm fine. He just surprised me, appearing like that." Jackson pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner. One of the ranch hands saw him riding toward town and came to warn me. I left the children with Maria and came as fast as I could." "You were here when it mattered," Eleanor assured him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "That's all that counts." They rode home together, checking frequently to ensure they weren't followed. At the ranch, they found Thomas and Sarah playing contentedly with Maria's children, unaware of the shadow that had briefly fallen across their parents' day. That night, after the children were asleep, Eleanor and Jackson sat on their porch as they had so many evenings before. The familiar landscape stretched before them, bathed in moonlight, peaceful and unchanging. "You think he'll come back?" Eleanor asked finally, voicing the concern that had lingered since their confrontation. Jackson considered the question carefully before answering. "No. Men like Evans are cowards at heart. They prey on those they perceive as weak, not those who stand their ground." He took her hand, running his thumb across her wedding band. "Besides, I notified Sheriff Miller before we left town. Evans is still on parole. If he shows his face in Columbus again, he'll find himself back in territorial prison." Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his steadiness. "When I saw him there in the bakery, I thought I'd be terrified. But all I felt was pity. He hasn't changed, hasn't grown. He's still the same lying, scheming man he always was." "While you," Jackson said with pride in his voice, "have become even stronger and more remarkable than the woman I fell in love with." Eleanor smiled, turning her face up to his. "We've built something real here, haven't we? Something true." "We have." Jackson kissed her gently. "A life founded on honest promises and kept faithfully, day after day." As they sat together watching the stars emerge, Eleanor felt the last lingering fear of James Evans fade away. He was a ghost from the past, powerless against the solid reality of the life she and Jackson had created together. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with no sign of James Evans or the shadow he had cast. Word came from Sheriff Miller by midday that Evans had been seen riding east, apparently having thought better of any plans for revenge. Life on the Quinn ranch returned to its pleasant rhythm. Thomas, now 7, began taking on more responsibility with the cattle under his father's watchful eye. Sarah, at 5, was Eleanor's shadow in the kitchen, learning the secrets of bread and pies that had been passed down from mother to daughter. The bakery in town continued to thrive, with Maria taking on more of the day-to-day operations as Eleanor devoted more time to her family and the ranch. There was talk of opening a second location in the growing settlement of Deeming to the east. As the years passed, the memory of James Evans and his threats receded further into the past. Occasional letters from the marshal's office confirmed he had returned to Missouri, apparently having found easier targets for his schemes than Eleanor and Jackson. Thomas grew into a young man with his father's integrity and his mother's determination. Sarah blossomed into a confident young woman who could ride as well as she could bake, equally at home on the range or in the kitchen. On the 20th anniversary of their wedding, Jackson surprised Eleanor with a trip to San Francisco, a city neither had ever seen, far from the dusty border town where they had found each other. 20 years, Jackson marveled as they stood on a hill overlooking the bay, the city spread before them like a jeweled carpet. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday I was bringing that package to your door. Eleanor slipped her arm through his, leaning against his still strong shoulder. And sometimes it feels like I've loved you my entire life. He turned to her, his blue eyes as clear and honest as they had been the day he'd first told her of his feelings. Do you ever regret it, choosing this life with me over what might have been? Eleanor shook her head, certain in her answer. Never, not for a single moment. You promised me you'd only ever have me, that your love would be true, and every day for 20 years you've kept that promise. Jackson drew her close, his arms as secure around her as they had always been. And I'll keep it for 20 more, Eleanor Quinn, for as long as I draw breath. As they stood together overlooking the endless horizon of the Pacific, Eleanor thought of the young woman she had been betrayed, frightened, uncertain of her future. That woman could never have imagined the richness of the life that awaited her, the depth of love she would find with a quiet cowboy who had stopped to deliver a package and ended up delivering her heart back to her, mended and stronger than before. In the wild territory where promises were often as shifting as the desert sands, Jackson Quinn had offered her the one thing she needed most, a love as steady as the land itself, as enduring as the mountains on the horizon, and as true as his word had proven to be, day after faithful day.